we please call the roll?
Crane. Esri. Fardi. Fava.
Here.
Furtado. Greer. Hanauer Friedman.
Here.
Lakshin.
Here.
Pugh. Rodriguez.
Here.
Rogers. Sexton. Storr. Solard. Thorsland. Vanish Theorenot. Wiggs. Wilson. Cagle. Carter. Cowart. Locke.
Okay, thank you. So for this study session, I don't believe that we need a quorum. So if we do seem slim in attendance and you're watching from home, that is what is going on and why we can move forward. So as far as the third item on the agenda, the notice of the meeting, who reads that? Okay, thank you. You could do that.
Notice is hereby given that a study session of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on January 28, 2025, 6 p.m. in the Shields Carter Meeting Room, Brookings Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, in said county for the purpose of Freedom of Information Act training for county board members.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can I now get a motion for the approval of our agenda? Wonderful. Ms. Lakshin, can I get a second? Ellie, great. Hanauer, Friedman. Is it roll call, right, to approve the agenda?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, yeah, I would like these on our, okay, anyways, our Labor Committee meetings. All right, so with the agenda, very simple agenda approved, we can now move to public participation. So,
We do have to vote.
oh, we do have to vote.
But
There we
not a
go. It's
roll
up and
call.
down. Got it. There we go. Okay, could we please call the roll? Yes, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, same sign. Beautiful. We are now ready for public participation. Please, one at a time.
Doing a great job.
Just falling down the stairs, through this meeting. Okay, with public participation closed, we can now move to communications. Any county board members with things to say of public importance, please, now's the time. Ms. Lakshin.
This might not be of public importance, but I think it's important for board members. I highly suggest that you go back and watch this meeting if you're not here, because you will get FOIA'd if you've not already been FOIA'd.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing no other communications, we are now ready for our presentation from the State's Attorney's Office on the Freedom of Information Act. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Muller, for those of you who are not familiar with me already. I am an Assistant State's Attorney with the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office Civil Division, and I'm our office's FOIA officer. Welcome to Fun with FOIA. So tonight we're going to review FOIA and a number of its general standards, how to read a request, how you should handle a request submitted directly to a board member, the general exemptions that may apply to FOIA requests, and some of the unusual or the standard conditions that can apply to a FOIA request, such as voluminous or unduly burdensome standards. I'm also going to talk about some of the common issues that a FOIA may experience, such as repeat or recurrent requesters and commercial requesters. Before we get started with the rest of the presentation, I did want to provide some of the useful resources for understanding FOIA. The full text of the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, and the Open Meetings Act, or OMA, are available online at the ilga.gov websites for your perusal at your own convenience. The Attorney General also operates a website. They are the organization that oversees the Public Access Counselor, the division that oversees all FOIA appeals. They operate a training portal that you should all be familiar with. Has anyone not done the FOIA or OMA training through the Attorney General? Okay, so I'm going to send around that link after today's meeting. If you have not done so already, please review that training. It's fairly quick. You will get a certificate of completion that I'll discuss a little bit later. Yes?
Will you be sending your full presentation? Or if not, can we get this slide with the links and information?
This whole
for-
presentation will be made available.
Awesome, thank you.
So the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. I'm sorry? Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. Oh, that's it, there's a typo in there. Lovely, way to get started. Freedom of Information Act requires that all public bodies designate one or more employee to act as the official FOIA officer. That is the person who is the point of contact with the public for that office, who ensures that all the records are kept, the responses go out in a timely manner, and communicate with the public access counselor if any appeal is to be made. Electronic training is available, and FOIA officers must complete that on an annual basis. It's my recommendation that public officials dealing with FOIA complete FOIA training every year through the Attorney General's website. When a public body designates or a new or additional FOIA officer, that person must complete the electronic training, but within 30 days after being designated as a FOIA officer. FOIA officers are not required to directly register with the Attorney General or the Public Access Counselor. However, when completing the online training, that portal does allow the individual to leave their contact information, and that is the contact information that the Public Access Counselor would use in communicating with them and their department. Obligations of board members under the Freedom of Information Act. Each elected or appointed member of the public body after 2012 shall successfully complete the electronic training curriculum available by the Public Access Counselor. Training must be completed no later than the 90th day after the date that the member either takes the oath of office or assumes responsibilities as a member of the public body. Each member successfully completing the electronic training curriculum shall file a copy of the certificate of completion with the public body. For the county board, that would be the Director of Administration. You can also submit copies to the state's attorney's office for our records, but you must complete that training within 90 days of assuming the office. Failure by one or more members of a public body to complete the training does in no way affect the validity of actions taken by the public body, but it is a record-keeping requirement by the Freedom of Information Act. Now, FOIA requests are commonly submitted to all public bodies. Last year was a banner year for all FOIA. Federal FOIA went up by 40%, and state-level FOIA, while I don't have hard numbers, followed a fairly similar trend. We also saw an increase in FOIAs submitted directly to board members, so we're going to discuss how board members should handle FOIAs submitted to them directly. They should be redirected to the state's attorney's office civil division, that would be me, and the Director of Administration. To be clear, FOIA requests are requests for public records maintained by a public body. What a public record is defined under the Freedom of Information Act as a whole list of various document types. I will read these out. I do apologize. They are records, reports, forms, writings, letters, memoranda, books, papers, maps, photographs, microfilms, cards, tapes, recordings, electronic data processing records, electronic communications, recorded information, and all other documentary materials pertaining to transaction of public business, regardless of physical form or characteristics. Now, I'm going to emphasize that all of these various types of document categories have to be pertaining to the transaction of public business. If they're not related to public business, they're not a public record. They are subject to review both by your FOIA officers or the state's attorney's office and ultimately the Public Access Counselor. Now, those records have to have been prepared by or for or having been used by, received by, in possession of, or under the control of the public body. I see a hand, yes.
Who is our public access officer?
Public Access Counselor is the division of the Attorney General's office who are tasked with overseeing FOIA responses and FOIA appeals. So once a FOIA is submitted, the public body has 5 business days to respond to that request, either with an extension, a response, or a denial. Once whatever it is received by the requester has 60 days to appeal that request to the public access counselor. When the public access counselor decides to open the appeal, they frequently ask the public body for all of the records related to that request, whether denied or redacted, for their review. Those documents are not supplied to the requester, but are purely reviewed by the public access counselor. The public access counselor will then issue a determination. Either they recommend disclosure, or they agree that the public body made the correct decision, or determine that the public body was very off in its analysis, and again, promotes that documents be released. They in no way take direct action to release any documents, but they have a right of review.
So they're in Springfield, Chicago?
I believe their office is in Springfield, but a number of their attorneys in the PAC operate out of their different offices. Yes.
So would employee payment records be part of those public accessible?
Any document in the possession of the public body can be requested under FOIA.
Okay.
Whether they meet the standards of the Freedom of Information Act as a public record is for the FOIA officer to evaluate and determine. There are a number of exemptions that apply to particular types of information, whether it's involved in litigation or any active issue, or, for example, presents a security risk. Those types of analysis depend on the record. For payroll, most likely that counts as a public record.
Okay. So what would happen if the public body were to submit inaccurate information to a FOIA request?
I suppose that depends on inaccurate in what sense?
Falsified.
I'm sorry?
Falsified.
Falsified would be a big problem. Intentionally misleading a FOIA requester, the purpose of FOIA is openness and transparency on the part of government. The presumption is that documents are disclosed and those documents are truthful. That would be the basis for an appeal to the PAC and a determination by the PAC that the public body was acting inappropriately.
Okay. So how would one verify the contents of a FOIA request release?
I think we're getting a little far afield. That's up to the requester to handle and depends on the type of information and whether they've appealed through the PAC process. They have the inherent right to appeal any information that they've received, whether they think it's inaccurate, redactions are inappropriate, or the public body has not responded in a timely manner. But that's for them to appeal to the PAC.
So I just want to call our attention to the agenda, right? We're going to have space for discussion and questions after he concludes. So jot your notes down. We can return to those, keep the meeting going as smoothly as possible.
FOIA requests to the board can involve a lot of different types of documentation. Again, those requests should be directed to the state's attorney's office for review and the director of administration. What happens once we receive the FOIA request is, again, we have 5 days to respond. So my office and the director of administration would ask for those documents to be, so that we can review them for any applicable exemptions or redactions that may be appropriate. Now, for example, FOIA requesters can have the right to request messages sent by board members during board meetings. The public access counselor in a number of recent determinations has determined that all messages sent by public officials during public business have a presumption that they are a public record. So be very aware of that if you're sending through any methodology, Snapchat, text, any email, anything sent during a board meeting is considered a public record. For example, I'm going to review a couple of hypotheticals. For example, the requester asks for all messages sent by board member A on date X. Again, all messages sent by a board member during a board meeting are presumed to be public records. However, if date X is not a public record, then the analysis primarily rests on whether it's personal and private communication versus public business. Public business, anything related to votes or documentation of a public nature, are public records. Text to a friend or intimate partner related to personal plans is private business. This is why it's very important that you keep your personal accounts and your public accounts that you operate for public business separate. If you have an email account that you use only for the transaction of public business, that is the email account we would be reviewing related to this request. If you are using your private email, both for private communication and public work, we would have to, that opens up that entire private email account to review, both by our department and potentially by the PAC. When you're discussing or transmitting a FOIA request or FOIA questions about a particular request, always include the actual request and the requester's language to that message. That way we are being specific and responding to the actual request. Requesters come in a number of colorful and vibrant forms. They can have a number of different language choices that mean very different things in a FOIA context. Paraphrasing makes that process very difficult. Again, the purpose of FOIA is the presumption of openness. Under FOIA, all records in the custody or possession of a public body are presumed to be open to inspection or copying. Any public body that asserts that a record is exempt from disclosure has the burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that it is exempt. It is our burden to show that the exemptions and other conditions that can apply to FOIA requests apply to that particular situation. So what happens once we receive the FOIA request is we perform initial review, establish the timeline to respond, which for most requests is 5 business days, and then we review all of the responsive information or records that could be involved in that FOIA request. Now, in reading the request, the initial evaluation is whether it is a commercial or non-commercial request. Commercial purpose is well defined by the Freedom of Information Act. It requires a number of different categories. But in essence, if an individual is not news media and is not using the information for academic purpose and they're going to be making money off it, that is a commercial request. The importance of that is if it is not a commercial request, we have only 5 business days from the day that the department receives the request, and the date of receipt is day 0 in that calculation, versus for a commercial request has 21 business days. Now I'm going to emphasize for requests issued to board members, it is the date received by any member of the public body, not the specific authorized representative of the public body. Once it is in our receipt of any board member, that starts the clock. That's why it's very important that you get it to the state's attorney's office and the director of administration as soon as possible, because we're on a very tight timeline with the vast majority of these requests. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. What if you're on vacation or fail to notice an email in your inbox?
That presents a problem. If you have, as a representative of the county board, you have a public-facing email that can receive FOIA requests. If you receive a FOIA request, that starts the clock. If you're traveling and you can have someone review that email as it's coming in, that would be better. But if for some reason you're on vacation or unavailable to receive that, reach out to my office as soon as possible. We may have to directly negotiate that with the FOIA requester. There is some availability for direct negotiation if the requester is open to receiving that late. The FOIA requester, if they did not receive a response within 5 days, can appeal that directly to the PAC and complain. Yes.
This is probably going to annoy Andrew. I'm going to do the non-lawyer answer. If we're actively filling the request, that goes a long way with the PAC. So if you miss it, just send it immediately. Let us start working on it right away. You know, we'll expedite it. The important thing is that we don't just be like, oh crap, we missed it and now who knows. We need to get it filled immediately, because if they do file a complaint and we have a communication with the PAC and we can say, oh, we've already filled it, you know, it's at least done, that resolves a good portion of the issue right there.
I don't disagree with Michelle, and that does not annoy me. Good faith does go a long way in these discussions. The public access counselor are also human, and they are also attorneys with busy schedules, so they are understanding of issues experienced by government, particularly in high-volume times for FOIA requests. However, if held to the letter of the law, we have 5 days to respond, and FOIA requesters can appeal that. Again, as soon as you see a FOIA request, whether it's late or not, just get it to Michelle and myself, or the Civil Division generally, and we'll work to get that processed as soon as possible. In evaluating a FOIA request, we also have to look at, does it actually describe an existing document? FOIA does not require answers to general questions. If they're asking, can I come and talk to you? Can you answer this strange question that I have? Can I come and photograph you? Those are not FOIA requests. They may say, under the FOIA Freedom of Information Act, I want to come and take your picture. That's not a FOIA request. That is an actual question that one of our departments has fielded under FOIA. FOIA is not designed to compel the compilation of data the government does not ordinarily keep, and does not compel the agency to provide answers to questions posed by the inquirer. The requester is obligated to reasonably describe what is being sought, but the agency must be careful not to read the request so strictly that the requester is denied information the agency well knows exists in its files. For example, the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office frequently gets requests for data regarding our various prosecutions or cases over the last several years. If it is easily accessible information, we can provide that. If it is something that does not in fact exist, or we do not track in the ordinary course of business, we are not obligated to create that record solely for this FOIA requester. If they are describing a document merely by the wrong name, we communicate with the FOIA requester to make sure that they are what they're actually looking for and get them the similar document even if they haven't named it exactly correctly in their FOIA request. Records requested must be described in enough detail to enable personnel to actually locate them. We frequently send clarification requests to the original requester. We are unable to determine what you require. In order to help you clarify your request, please contact our office and our FOIA officer with additional information identifying the records sought. We also receive handwritten letters, sometimes from inmates or other members of the community, that are damaged, illegible, or in some cases just very, very odd. To find out what people are talking about, we do reach out to those requesters. If you have any doubt about communication that you've received, whether it's asking for a document or looks like it includes the word FOIA, when in doubt, send it along and we can take a look at it. Special conditions that can apply to FOIA requests include voluminous. A voluminous request is one that includes more than 5 requests for more than 5 different categories of records, or a combination of individual requests that total requests for more than 5 different categories of 5 records in a period of 20 business days, or it requires the compilation of more than 500 pages of public records unless a single record exceeds 500 pages. So if they're asking for a determination by the county board that was over 500 pages long, that one determination is not voluminous. But if they're asking for 500 different county board minutes that are total, let's say 2,000 pages of documentation, that would be a voluminous request. The other special condition can be unduly burdensome. The Freedom of Information Act defines this as requests calling for all records falling within a category that shall be compiled unless compliance with the request would be unduly burdensome for a complying public body and there is no way to narrow the request and the burden on the public body outweighs the public interest in the information. This is situations that would unduly burden the actual operation of the department to fulfill the request. For both of these, the requester is extended an opportunity to confer and refine their request so that it is down to a manageable portion. If they refuse to refine their request, those requests can be denied. But if they refine their request, we are obligated to try and work with them to reach a mutual understanding and a reasonable level of documentation. Unduly burdensome specifically requires provision of an opportunity to narrow, and the unduly burdensome requirement must be invoked within either the initial 5 days or within the period of extension allowed to the public body under certain circumstances. If, for some reason, a request is lost or not seen within the initial 5 days, the public body loses the right to invoke the unduly burdensome standard. So, you really concern me with the whoops, but recurrent requesters is another standard under the Freedom of Information Act, but this is a very high standard. It's very rare for us to reach this with a particular requester. This is a person that in the 12 months immediately preceding the newest request has submitted to the same public body a minimum of 50 requests for records total, 15 requests in a 30-day period, or 7 requests in a 7-day period. For purposes of this definition, requests made by news media or academic or scientific organizations cannot be considered recurrent requesters. I'm going to talk about exemptions. Exemptions are particular conditions that can apply to the category of records that are requested. They are under Section 5 ILCS 140/7, commonly referred to as the Section 7 exemptions. These are exemptions that when a request is made to inspect or copy a public record that contains information that is exempt from disclosure, but also contains information that is not exempt from disclosure, the public body may elect to redact the information that is exempt. The public body shall make the remaining information available for inspection or copying. These exemptions must be construed narrowly and cannot be used as a blanket to entirely redact all of the information unless all of that information meets the particular standards of that exemption. I'm going to talk about a number of those exemptions, but there is quite a list if you have any particular hankering to go through the statute itself. Section 7(1)A, information that's specifically prohibited from disclosure by federal or other state laws or rules and regulations implementing federal or state law. Examples of this can be the Juvenile Court Act or HIPAA or Supreme Court regulations on handling of discovery documents. Under 7(1)D, records in the possession of any public body created in the course of administrative enforcement proceedings and any law enforcement or correctional agency for law enforcement purposes, but only to the extent that disclosure would interfere with pending or actually and reasonably contemplated law enforcement proceedings conducted by any law enforcement or correctional agency that is recipient of the request. If there is an actual enforcement or administrative proceeding, those records can be redacted. 7(1)H, proposals and bids for any contract, grant, or agreement, including information that if it were disclosed would frustrate procurement or give an advantage to any person proposing to enter into contract agreement with the body until an award or final selection is made. Information prepared by or for the body in preparation of a bid shall be exempt until an award or final selection is made. I'm sure some of you can see this application to board records. Until a final determination is made, much of the consideration for bids or other contracts is exempt under FOIA or exemptable and redactable. Again, final selections and determinations would be disclosable. 7(1)L, minutes of meetings of public bodies closed to the public as provided in the Open Meetings Act until the public body makes the minutes available to the public. It is made clear in much litigation that FOIA is not a means to get around OMA. 7(1)M, privileged communication. This is your communication as a public body with the attorneys or auditors representing that public body that would not be subject to discovery and litigation, and materials prepared or compiled for the public body in anticipation of criminal, civil, or administrative proceedings upon the request of the attorneys advising the public bodies, and materials prepared or compiled with respect to internal audits of public bodies. I'm going to move through these a little bit quicker because records relating to adjudication of employee grievances, records relating to collective bargaining. All of that information is potentially exemptable. That is why it's important to get these documents to the state's attorney's office and the director of administration as soon as possible, so we can take those records and review for any of those possible exemptions and what we can and can't redact. Now, I discussed this a little bit earlier. Once a requester receives the documentation or receives a denial of their request, they can appeal and have a right to appeal to the public access counselor. The public access counselor will then issue a notice to the public body that there is a PAC appeal. If for some reason you receive any documentation from the public access counselor, direct it to us as soon as possible, as that is the initial stage of the appeal. They generally request all information related to the request, whether disclosed or not, and any information that we would want them to be aware of regarding our internal deliberations. Again, that information is not directed to the requester. It's purely for the PAC to consider and review for their final determination. For any FOIA response, we always include the PAC appeal language so that the requester knows how to file a request for appeal and the timeline that they have to make that request. They have 60 calendar days from when they received the response or sent their request to make an appeal. They can make a request for appeal if they do receive absolutely no communication from us, and the PAC would then reach out and begin the appeal process. Now, does anyone have any questions about FOIA or how to administrate FOIA? Yes.
If you get a FOIA request for something that is already publicly available, say on the website or what have you, do we still forward it to you, or can we simply point that person in the right direction?
You should still, if you're receiving a FOIA request, you should still direct that to us, as we will put that on the official letterhead and direct them to the website. But ultimately, if it's publicly available information, we don't have to disclose anything additional. It's directing them to the website or where it's otherwise publicly available. Yes.
Thanks for doing this, Andrew. Super helpful. I'm just curious, what would be an example of a request that is unduly burdensome that is not voluminous?
Generally, I will call on Michelle for her opinion because she sees a lot of these as well. But generally, unduly burdensome requests are calling for all information in a general category. A voluminous request may know exactly what they're looking for. I'm going to talk about requests I've received. For example, requester A wants all of the records in specific case number, which is their felony murder file. That has a lot of information in it, but may not be unduly burdensome. It's 2,000 pages long. But a unduly burdensome request may be asking for all of the criminal information about all of the criminal prosecutions that your office has handled in the last 20 years. It's a general call for a data set or category of information, not a specific request. Michelle?
A popular one that we get is someone will request, I want all of the emails between these 5 employees from this 2-year time span. So that is instantly voluminous. And eventually, after a lot of back and forth, they'll narrow it down to something that may actually be less than 500 pages. But then someone has to go through and read all of those emails to figure out what needs to be redacted. And that can continue to be unduly burdensome. Or a request I think I had not too long ago was somebody wanted a bunch of very specific types of financial information that would have required me to go through and redact bank account numbers like hundreds of times, right? So that's unduly burdensome because there's one person that can do that. So things like that.
That's helpful. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
What is the legal definition of news media?
Somewhat evolving, depending on, generally, newspapers, other agencies that are traditionally recognized, but certain blogs can be recognized as news media under certain circumstances that would need to be analyzed depending on their history, their record, what they're actually doing. Yes.
What about private communication that happens during the public meeting?
Again, communication during a public meeting is presumed to be a public record, and they have the right of access and review, and I would recommend no private communication if you don't want it disclosed. Yes.
Before my question, I'll say that when I was FOIA'd, I was told by Andrew that the text to my husband saying, "I will be done in time to do dance pickup," were considered private communication that was not necessary to include.
Now, they have to be included in your disclosure
They were,
to
yeah.
us to determine whether there's an exemption
Yes.
that can apply for private information. But
So-
again, it's presumed to be public information unless we do that review and justify it
yeah.
under those exemptions.
With the caveat that,
So-
yes, I did send those to him and say, hey, here's
So-
all this.
But again,
Yeah.
all of that is subject to review by the public access counselor, who may choose to disagree with our definition as private communications. So best practice is limit or no
Right.
communication during a public meeting.
And yeah, that's a text for me that's never going to stop because I have to be able to say, yes, I will pick her up or no, I won't. But my question was, how is there not a conflict when the person being FOIA'd is the FOIA officer? Like, how do we know that there's
Well,
truth in what they're sharing, I guess?
the person being FOIA'd is the FOIA officer. Well, the
Like,
FOIA.
for example, the elected officials of the different departments here at Champaign County a lot of them are their own FOIA officers.
Well, the public bodies can nominate any person or multiple people as FOIA officer. There's no limitation on that. There's no specific requirement. It's not the head of the particular department. Again, if the person is sending out incorrect or falsified information, that's subject to PAC appeal and PAC oversight. At this point, unless there's actual, that would be subject to a PAC appeal and dependent on the particular circumstances. Yes, Michelle?
I would just add that FOIA, no matter who's being FOIA'd and who the FOIA officer, FOIA hinges on ethics. Because if the FOIA is for your text messages, we're not going to go through your phone. We're going to say, send us what applies to this FOIA. And we have to believe that you're going to send the appropriate things. And it's that way for all FOIA requests. It's all contingent on the person being ethical and honest.
So if we have reason to believe they're not being ethical, you could either go through a PAC appeal or just, I know I'm never going to get ethical information from this person, I guess is.
No comment.
Can I comment as not the lawyer? Yes, you could do a PAC appeal, depending on what you're asking for. If it's a county document, you could try going to like the board FOIA, so the public could try a different entry into getting access to the FOIA to see what kind of comparison documents you get.
Thank you. I have no plans to submit a FOIA, and I've never submitted one in my life. This is the kind of thing that I wonder about as I sit through the presentation. Like, if somebody's their own officer, how do I trust them when I don't trust them? So,
FOIA is based on the presumption of openness and that all records are inherently accessible. If a particular exemption or other conditions such as unduly burdensome or voluminous applies, they're construed narrowly. So there is a presumed standard of openness in all of these FOIA requests. Now, FOIA requesters can be anonymous, can be under fake names. I've received requests from none of your business. You know, they come in many forms and we try and comply with them all the same. I saw a request over here. Yes.
Yes, and thanks again for doing the presentation. How long after we serve in our office can FOIA, can our information from us be FOIA'd?
As long as that information is in the possession of the public body, that is technically FOIA-able. That also is impacted by the Local Records Act, how long we're required to keep certain kinds of communication or certain kinds of documentation. You should be checking with Michelle regarding disposal certificates if you're talking about a certain type of board administrative record. If you're talking about your email communication, that usually persists. Currently with IT, a lot of documents sent within the county persist pretty much forever, but they are disposed of in accordance with the Local Records Act.
I just want to add, this is why we're really, really pushy about using the county email address as a board member, because then we will automatically archive and maintain the documentation appropriately after you've left the board. And if there's a FOIA that pertains to something that may have been in that email after you've left the board, when we do the IT search for the keywords, it will check for that information as appropriately as it should. If you're using an email address that is not the county's, we cannot do any of that for you. You are completely responsible for searching, storing, archiving, maintaining, disposing of all of that information on your own.
Yes.
Okay, perhaps we may have something that's not an email, but some other type of record,
A memorandum or something of that nature.
or notes, and so forth.
Notes and personal handwritten documentation are generally not considered public records. They're not subject to the standards of the Local Records Act and can be disposed of. If you're talking about a formal board document, memorandum, actual negotiations, that sort of thing, that are formal, either policy documents or records of the department, those have to be handled, and again, in accordance with the Local Records Act. Now, for those records, when we do dispose of them, we do get in advance of disposing them, we get a disposal certificate from the Secretary of State. It's not uncommon for us to respond to requests from older records with the disposal certificate and the explanation that those documents no longer exist. But if you're talking about your personal notepad, that is not, there's no bar for you throwing that away.
Thanks. First of all, sorry I missed everything. I had it in my head it was 6:30, and I had this whole plan. Get home, eat the spaghetti, leave at 6:10. It's going to be fine. I don't know why I thought it was 6:30. So I apologize that I missed everything. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
On that note, I would add also that while it's not subject to local records, if it exists when a FOIA request comes in, it may be something you need to disclose. But I also wanted to address, Jenny, when you were talking about your couple of options of resign yourself to never getting it or appeal to PAC. You have a third option. You could always go to court too, where you could start to get into the subpoena process and require records. So, 2 cents.
That's true. FOIA requesters always have the option of filing a lawsuit in the circuit court. That we do see that from some of our FOIA requesters who are dissatisfied with the public body's response. Just something to be aware of when we're responding to those. Yes.
No question. How does social media fit into all this? Like if somebody discusses board business, but it's outside of a meeting's hours or something, is that FOIA-able, or is it like how?
All records and documents relating to the transaction of public business are considered public records. If you have again, this goes into the same as if you had a private email account and a public email account. That the public email account you're performing all of your board work through, and you get a FOIA for all of your public records. We would review that public account, and we would ask, have you conducted any public business through your private account? If you say no, in the initial review by our office, we would believe you. If it later came out that you had public work through that email, the public access counselor may require more direct review of that email account. If you're talking social media accounts, if it's your public board member account that you're representing yourself in your position and you're conducting conversations about board business, that's presumed to be a public record. If you've got your private account that you only talk to family on and you're not conducting public business on, that's a private account. The goal is to not have those two cross over. Yes.
I guess follow-up then is what makes it, I don't know, what makes it a private account versus a public account? Like if you're making public posts and talking about the board on
Transaction.
your account, but it's not your board account, are you like conducting business or what are you, I don't,
If you're,
I think actually, just, I think kind of piggybacking off what she's saying, Andrew, wouldn't there kind of be a difference between conducting business and stating your opinion?
if you're discussing board business, I would say no. That would become a public record, as, again, you are representing yourself as yourself in your official position. If you are discussing board business and you're a board member, that's a public record. The social media is fairly open. Again, if you have a private account where you don't list your board affiliation, you're only communicating with family, that's a private account. Again, some of that is dependent on the details, and that's why the review of my office is very important, because we will have to go through those messages if you have any questions or whether that is borderline or over the line. Generally, if it's borderline, that's more in the realm of a public record. Yes.
If it's a public, like it's my official, I'm county board member Facebook page, but it exists and it's free and open to everybody to come see, can you talk about whether we would need to be producing that in screenshots or something versus just pointing you to it and then you then direct the requester to it?
That would depend on what the requester is looking for. If they request all of Matt Sullard's public business conducted between a date range, that may have to be a component of the request. If they're asking for all of the Facebook posts that Matt Sullard made on Tuesday, then we would have to go through and see if any of them relate to public business. If they are, we would, again, it'd be highly dependent on what the request is. We may have to take snapshots of the Facebook account, but if it is publicly facing and already a public record that they can have access to as a member of the public, we can simply direct them to that website or a private blog or what have you.
And can I just piggyback up on that on a slight tangent? If you have a page where you're, representing yourself in your official elected capacity, you should not delete your posts and you should not delete comments that people may leave on your posts. The caveat being, if you have a rules of conduct posted on your page and someone is, on there cussing you out and all kinds of other things, then you could censor it at that point. If you need that rules of conduct, we have one on our website that you can link to, but you are representing yourself as the government, so now you are all up in free speech territory. So, if you do that, you're kind of letting the public just say what they want to say within reason, but also within government reason. So keep that in mind. But definitely don't delete your posts once you put them
Now,
up.
I would recommend that you limit your social media presence, as that makes this easier, but I understand that that's not always possible in today's age, so yes.
Where do campaign accounts fall in this? Are they private or public?
Campaign accounts are a little different because they have their own record-keeping requirements with the Board of Elections, and they're not part of your official position. It's different. It's not usually part of the public record or the public body's records the same way. Yes, Matt.
Could it become that way if rather than start up a new government official page, I just would continue posting on the campaign page, but now I'm talking from my seat sort of view?
Yes, then that becomes your platform as a member of the public body.
And don't transition it back. So once you go government, you cannot go back to campaign, because now you're really mixing campaign and political resources, or campaign and government resources, in a really uncomfortable way. So if you do that, that's fine. If you go from political to elected once, that's fine, but then just keep it there. Don't go back the other way.
And it's always cleaner if you show that separation between the two, if you have two separate accounts for the two different things, because then if somebody files a request, you can say, well, that was not public record, or they aren't public body, transaction of public business. This is, it's a cleaner distinction. Yes.
Follow up to that, do you, pages don't have to allow comments, right? You can turn off comments, and then there's no question about having to retain or delete or block anybody.
Well, I think that on your government page, you should still not delete your own posts because
Yes.
you've put a record out to the public, and it could get messy as to where that falls under the Local Records Retention Act. So I wouldn't delete your own posts.
Sure, I was just talking about
Yeah.
comments. You can turn off comments, and then you don't have the question about, I don't like what that person said, I deleted it.
Yeah, on your campaign page, you can do whatever you want in that vein. You can delete posts, censor posts, block people, turn it off. That's your business completely from a campaign standpoint. If it's a government page, can you turn off comments?
I believe you can turn off comments as long, again, do not delete comments unless you have a code of conduct, and don't delete your own posts because those are statements by a public official. Yeah, yes.
This is like when I got FOIA'd, I had so many questions for you. I'm just like that in person too. Okay, so I sent, I did. I sent a reminder yesterday, I think, about today's meeting. And I BCC everybody in my caucus, but I sent it to my Gmail just to put something in the to field. I don't have to put something in the to field, right? But if I do that, am I opening up my personal Gmail to public record because I sent it to myself?
It's always cleanest if you keep the two separate.
Okay.
It opens it up to.
No, I'll just send it to my county address or I send it to Noban.
Again,
Yes.
it,
Okay,
it
yeah.
keeps it open to analysis and evaluation. It may not, in fact, be FOIA-able. That may
Okay.
be the determination of our office, but depending on our evaluation, but it does create the requirement for you to review all your emails, determine if you've conducted any public business or have any emails related to the conduct of public business in your private email.
Well,
So
I've got reminders about caucus for tonight's meeting in my public email, if anybody wants those. So,
Well, again, we experienced a banner year for Freedom of Information requests last year. We're expecting that trend to continue. We have a number of FOIA and First Amendment auditors who are looking for different records this year. So just keep in mind that, again, it's a 5-day timeline to get these turned around. And if you have not already, please go through the Attorney General's website, the Public Access Counselor, their portal for training on FOIA and OMA. That needs to be done within 90 days of taking office.
Any additional questions? I am looking at the clock.
I see Michelle has a question.
Sorry, I have one more question. So for Member Store's first question about, if you go on vacation or something, would it be logical for, if a county board member knows they're not going to be responding or checking their email for more than, 24 to 48 hours, to put on a auto response that says, if you're submitting a FOIA request, you need to send it to this email address instead?
That would be appropriate, yes.
Okay, because we have a county FOIA at champaigncountyil.gov is the FOIA email address. So if you don't want that stuff, coming to you, or you're not going to be answering your email or checking it, just put that out there, and you've satisfied the requirement of directing them to the appropriate email venue to make their request.
Could you send that, what you just said out?
Yeah.
Because that sounds really good.
I will also, I'll send it out with the links as well for the reminders for the 2 trainings. So.
We'll also be sending out a copy of this presentation and the Attorney General's training portal. Yes.
Can we just have an auto reply on our emails that say if you're doing a FOIA request and point them in the right direction?
That's
No, I
what
mean,
we're-
regardless of vacation status.
I would not recommend that. You are a member of a public body. You are a representative of the county board. If you receive communication that is direction of a FOIA request to a member of the public body, there is no requirement that it be directed to the right person. Once it's received by the department, the clock starts. So if you're out of the office and or on vacation and you've included that explanation in the automatic response, then you've at least provided a record that we can demonstrate to the PAC of why it was not responded to by you within those 5 days. It was directed, they were directed to respond to or redirect their request to the appropriate portal.
Okay, I see no other questions or comments. Is that correct? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. Do you
I
have
will
any-
say if other questions regarding the Freedom of Information Act occur to you after this meeting, this is a significant part of what I do, so feel free to reach out and ask me any questions that may occur to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, and thank you for being so generous with your time tonight. Okay, wonderful. So moving on to the next item on our agenda, that is other business. I do not believe that we have any other business, so that would lead us right into adjournment. Thanks, folks. This is adjourned.